Imagine this. You wake up one morning and everything that gave your life structure, your job, your family, your beliefs, even your name is gone. Stripped of identity, rules, and expectations, you are now free in the most terrifying sense of the word. No gods to obey, no society to appease, just you, alone, with the crushing burden of choosing who to become. This is not a thought experiment designed to intrigue. It is a psychological autopsy of the human condition, one that Jean-Paul Sartre dissected with brutal honesty. For Sartre, the greatest danger was not external chaos but internal evasion. We fear freedom not because it limits us, but because it lays bare our responsibility for everything we are and become. It sounds contradictory. Who wouldn't want to be free? We chant it like a sacred hymn: freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom of identity. But Sartre's warning echoes louder than ever. Freedom without responsibility is the most seductive form of self-betrayal. In Being and Nothingness, Sartre writes, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." It is not a poetic mantra, but a relentless demand. There are no pre-written scripts, no divine puppeteers pulling our strings. Every action we take is a declaration of who we are. Every refusal to choose is, paradoxically, a choice made. And yet we run. We fabricate excuses, adopt borrowed identities, hide behind the personas assigned to us by society. We become teachers, soldiers, parents, activists, not as authentic expressions of our being, but as shields from the horrifying realization that these roles are masks we chose, or worse, refused to choose. Carl Jung once warned, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." This self-evasion is not just psychological cowardice, it is existential treason. We become alien to ourselves, and in that alienation, we drift into what Sartre called bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to escape the anguish of freedom. Consider the employee who despises their job yet remains year after year because they have no choice, or the person trapped in a loveless marriage, convinced that duty and sacrifice are noble disguises for their paralysis. These are not victims of fate. They are co-conspirators in their own imprisonment. Sartre's philosophy is merciless because reality is merciless. The moment we accept that there is no inherent meaning in the universe is the moment we are forced to create it ourselves. But most of us recoil from this demand. We'd rather hand over our authorship to religion, to ideology, to inherited norms. Why? Because if we are the authors, then we are also responsible for every tragedy, every failure, every unrealized potential. That weight is unbearable unless we face it with authenticity. And here lies the abyss. What if freedom, instead of liberating us, reveals us? What if the terror of being free is not the burden of choice, but the exposure of our true selves beneath the lies we've told ourselves for years? In modern society, this evasion has only become more sophisticated. Algorithms curate our desires. Social media crafts our identities. Institutions offer comforting narratives that keep us from having to think, to choose, to be. But beneath all this noise, Sartre's voice endures like a whisper through the fog. You are condemned to be free. Condemned. Because freedom is not a gift, it is a sentence. And yet, in this terrifying reality, there is a glimmer of something sacred. For if we dare to face ourselves, naked, unprotected, raw, we can begin to carve a life that is truly ours. The question is not whether we are free. The question is whether we have the courage to own what that freedom demands. We walk through life wearing masks so intricately molded that we forget they aren't our faces. The employee mask, the parent mask, the patriot, the rebel, the spiritual seeker. Each costume stitched together by expectations, habit, and fear. We convince ourselves these are who we are. But behind the polite smiles and socially sanctioned titles, there often exists a deep and aching emptiness, a quiet whisper that says, "This isn't really me." Sartre called this phenomenon mauvaise foi, bad faith. It is not simply lying, but lying to oneself. It is when we take refuge in roles so we don't have to face the disorienting truth that we are fundamentally free and therefore responsible. It's not that society forces these roles upon us. It's that we eagerly adopt them to avoid the heavy lifting of self-definition. Take the example of a waiter Sartre writes about. The man isn't just performing duties, he is playing at being a waiter. His every gesture is exaggerated, overdetermined, as if he's reciting lines from a script. He is not simply serving coffee. He is hiding behind the act. He convinces himself that being a waiter is his essence, his fate. In doing so, he avoids confronting the possibility that he could be something entirely different. The mask becomes a shield against freedom. But this is not just a story about waiters. It's about all of us. We hide in relationships that no longer nourish us. We drown in careers that devour our spirit. We swear allegiance to ideologies not because we believe in them, but because they provide ready-made meaning. We abdicate authorship of our lives to avoid the existential nausea of choosing, and in doing so, we die before we've ever really lived. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people." This forfeiture is the essence of bad faith. It is the small death we endure daily, the death of our authentic self beneath the layers of what we think we're supposed to be. We think we're escaping responsibility, but in reality, we're imprisoning ourselves in other people's expectations. But the lie has consequences. The more we cling to false identities, the more fragmented we become inside. Anxiety, depression, despair. These are not always signs of chemical imbalance. Often, they are spiritual messages, internal alarms ringing louder with every compromise we make. The soul rebels against fiction. It hungers for truth. And every time we deny that truth, something inside us cracks. The tragedy is that our culture rewards these masks. Efficiency over introspection. Success over authenticity. Conformity over courage. We are told to fit in, to climb, to mimic, never to pause, reflect, or dare to ask, who am I when no one is looking? So what is the alternative? Sartre's answer is brutal yet liberating. Authenticity. It means tearing off the masks, refusing to hide behind societal scripts, and standing naked before the void. It is not comfortable. It will not win applause, but it is the only path toward becoming truly human. And yet, authenticity does not mean selfishness or chaos. It means accepting that our lives are our responsibility, that our pain, our failures, even our masks were chosen. And if they were chosen, they can be unchosen. There's a reason most never make this leap. The cost is too high. To live authentically means there's no one else to blame, no fate to curse, no God to beg for instructions, just your reflection in the mirror, asking, what will you do with the unbearable freedom you've been given? The masks are seductive, yes, but they are also suffocating. Eventually, we must decide whether to keep wearing them or to tear them off and face the terrifying joy of becoming. There comes a moment, sometimes in the quiet hours of early morning or amid the static of everyday monotony, when the scaffolding of life seems to collapse. The routines, the distractions, the small talk, they all fall silent, and what remains is a vast, echoing void. You stare into your coffee cup or out of a window, and something inside whispers, none of this means anything. The sensation isn't just mental, it's visceral, like standing at the edge of a cliff where the ground disappears beneath your feet. Jean-Paul Sartre understood this abyss. He didn't dress it in philosophical pleasantries. He let it howl. In a world abandoned by gods, saturated with war and disillusionment, Sartre confronted a reality many fear to name. There is no inherent meaning in life. This is not nihilism in its crude form. Burn it all down, nothing matters. No, it is something more chilling and honest. Sartre's Existentialism tells us, there is no pre-written script. Meaning is not something to be found, but something to be made. The universe doesn't hand you a purpose. It stares back at you, blank and indifferent, waiting to see what you'll do with the silence. And this is where most people flee. Faced with the void, they retreat into religion, ideology, consumption, anything to drown out the unbearable freedom of having to create their own meaning from nothing. Aldous Huxley warned of this escape when he said, most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted. That includes meaning. We cling to inherited beliefs not out of faith, but out of fear that, without them, we would collapse under the weight of our own emptiness. This weight, what Sartre called nausea, is not a metaphor. It is the existential vertigo that comes from recognizing that nothing outside of us can tell us who we are. It is the confrontation with a world where no divine scoreboard exists to track our efforts, where no external judge rewards our virtue or punishes our cowardice. In that space, we are terrifyingly alone, but also, for those brave enough to accept it, limitlessly powerful. But let's not romanticize this power. The freedom Sartre speaks of is not jubilant or simple. It is raw. Imagine standing in front of a blank canvas, forever stretching in all directions, with only your trembling hands and finite time. Every brushstroke matters. Every hesitation echoes. That is the existential position of the human being. We are the artists of meaning, even if we're terrified to pick up the brush. The cultural climate we inhabit now makes this dread even harder to bear. In the age of infinite scrolling, curated identities, and performative existence, the silence needed to ask ourselves the hard questions has been nearly erased. We don't have time to face the void, so we fill it with noise. We post, we scroll, we comment, not out of connection, but to avoid the confrontation. We keep moving so we don't have to feel how lost we really are. But what if that feeling of lostness is not a curse, but an invitation? Sartre believed that once we confront meaninglessness directly, once we stop running, we discover something fierce and sacred, the responsibility to create a life worth living. Not because someone told us to, not because it's expected, but because we choose to. Every act becomes a form of authorship. Every gesture, a statement. Every decision, a signature on the blank page of existence. Yes, the void is terrifying, but it is also pure. It is the place where illusions die and freedom is born. And from that place, true meaning, raw, personal, unshakable, can begin to rise. When the void stares back, many of us don't answer with courage, we answer with conformity. The terror of absolute freedom doesn't always drive us inward toward introspection. Often, it drives us outward, toward the safety of the crowd. It's easier to dissolve into the herd than to bear the weight of carving a singular path. To be responsible for our choices is daunting, but to dissolve into the anonymity of groupthink, that at least numbs the fear. Friedrich Nietzsche foresaw this retreat with unsettling clarity. He described the rise of the last man, a creature who avoids suffering and risk at all costs, who craves comfort and predictability, and who congratulates himself for being safe. The earth hath then become small, and on it there hoppeth the last man who mocketh everything small, Nietzsche warned. These are not villains. They are the apathetic, the ones who choose routine over truth, tranquility over passion, consensus over confrontation, and make no mistake, the herd has infinite disguises. It can wear the robes of religion, the jargon of academia, the hashtags of activism, or the camouflage of nationalism. It doesn't matter if it's left or right, sacred or secular. The common denominator is the surrender of one's inner authority to the collective. It is the impulse to let someone else tell you what matters, how to think, who to be. Sartre's warning is piercing. When you dissolve into the herd, you abandon your essence. You become a thing, a cog, a label, a statistic. You escape responsibility not by transcending it, but by burying it under consensus. But the cost is enormous. You lose the right to your own soul. Look around today, and you'll see the herd mentality woven into the fabric of our age. Social media thrives on outrage not because it enlightens, but because it unites people in shared indignation, providing them with a ready-made identity. I am what I'm against. But anger without introspection is just another escape, a way to feel significant without being responsible. It is Sartre's bad faith digitized and scaled. You might belong to a movement, a cause, a political tribe, and think you're fighting for justice. And perhaps you are. But pause for a moment and ask, did I choose this identity freely? Or did I absorb it to escape the terror of not knowing who I am? Are your beliefs truly yours? Or were they installed like software downloaded for comfort? In Viktor Frankl's words, when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. But pleasure takes many forms: comfort, consensus, conformity. These can all become opiates. They feel like peace, but they are often paralysis. Escaping into the herd offers a temporary reprieve, yes, but it also makes you invisible to others and to yourself. You become a ghost in your own life, haunted by the decisions you never truly made. And what begins as relief gradually transforms into a subtle, chronic despair. The kind that lingers beneath the surface, hard to name, harder to confront. But here's the unbearable paradox. True belonging doesn't come from dissolving into the collective. It comes from standing apart with integrity. Only when you stop pretending, stop mimicking, stop hiding behind what everyone else is doing, can you begin to attract real connection. Not as a persona, not as a group member, but as a self-creating individual. The herd promises safety, but it cannot give you peace. That peace, if it comes, only emerges when you accept that the price of authenticity is loneliness, and that loneliness is often the birthplace of truth. What if everything you're waiting for, your purpose, your identity, your redemption, isn't waiting at all? What if it's demanding, screaming to be born, but only through your own labor, your own anguish, your own decisions? This is the torment of becoming. Sartre didn't hand out blueprints for selfhood. He shattered them. In his view, existence precedes essence. We are not born with a soul neatly wrapped and ready for display. We become who we are through what we do. Not once, not in some climactic moment, but in every small decision, every refusal to act, every silent compromise. You are not a fixed entity. You are a constant construction project. But this truth feels more like a curse than a comfort, doesn't it? Because once you realize no one is coming to save you, not God, not destiny, not love, not politics, there's a kind of vertigo. You stand at the center of your life, hammer in one hand, chisel in the other, staring at an unformed slab of self, and suddenly the silence becomes deafening. This is what Sartre meant when he said man is condemned to be free. Freedom is not light and airy. It is weight, crushing, sacred, inescapable weight. And with that weight comes something few are prepared to bear. Guilt. Not religious guilt, not societal guilt, but existential guilt, the guilt of not having become what you could have become. The guilt of seeing, even faintly, the outline of your better self in the fog and knowing you turned away. This is not punishment. It is the conscience of freedom. It is the soul mourning its own unrealized possibilities. So we distract. We rationalize. We tell ourselves we'll become better later, when the kids are older, when the job settles, when the world calms down. But later is the lie we whisper to avoid the terror of now. Becoming doesn't wait. It doesn't negotiate. It demands everything, and it demands it now. Nietzsche, ever the provocateur of the soul, once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what if you have no why? What if your life has become a series of how-s with no center, no heartbeat, no meaning? This is not a question of morality, it's a crisis of ontology. You don't just lack purpose, you lack a self you can respect. This is where Sartre's brilliance slices deepest. He forces us to accept that even not choosing is a choice. Even stagnation is an act. You cannot avoid authorship. You can only pretend you're not writing the story. But the ink is still yours. To become is to grieve the comfort of fixed identities. It is to walk away from the convenient lies that have coddled you for years. It is to feel everything you avoided feeling and to risk everything you were taught to protect. But it is also to reclaim your life. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, not to groom, not to flatter, but to interrogate. Not who am I, but what have I allowed myself to become? And more urgently, what am I still afraid to become? These are not questions for philosophers alone. They are for anyone who senses the slow rot of unchosen existence. Anyone who feels the pang of meaninglessness and suspects it might be their own silence creating the void. Anyone who, in their secret hours, longs to become real, even if it means breaking everything first. Because becoming isn't about perfection. It's about choosing with eyes open, owning your life like a scarred masterpiece, accepting the horror of freedom and wielding it like a sword, not to destroy, but to carve something worthy out of your days. There is a moment, often after the rupture, after the masks have fallen and the void has spoken, when something quieter arrives. Not certainty, not peace, but the faint pulse of something holy, agency. It doesn't roar, it doesn't dazzle. It hums like a distant drumbeat. The realization that even here, especially here, in the wreckage of everything false, you still have the power to choose. Jean-Paul Sartre's entire philosophy hangs on this unbearable, luminous truth. We are not what we are, and we are what we are not. We are always in the process of becoming, always ahead of ourselves, reaching, projecting, shaping. The past cannot define us. Our roles cannot contain us. And no failure, no matter how damning, has the final word unless we allow it to. But this truth cuts both ways. It means the excuses are gone. It means you cannot blame your father, your boss, your trauma, your culture, or even your past self. All of these shaped you, yes, but none of them owns you. You own you. So what now? Now you must choose. Not react, not perform, not conform, but choose. Consciously, willfully, and above all, authentically. You must ask yourself what is worth suffering for. Because you will suffer. That's the price of aliveness. But suffering in pursuit of a self you respect is worlds apart from the quiet decay of a life unlived. Sartre believed we are authors of our own meaning, but he also understood the gravity of that role. We are not gods. We are finite, fallible, wounded. But it is precisely in our limits that freedom becomes real. Because every day you wake up, you are offered the terrifying miracle of choosing again. To leave, to begin, to speak, to forgive, to create, to stop pretending. Carl Jung spoke of this same transformation when he said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This is not self-help. This is soul surgery, a return to responsibility not as burden but as blessing. Responsibility is not about guilt or blame. It is about responsibility, the ability to respond to life moment by moment from a place of consciousness and courage. It is the refusal to sleepwalk, the refusal to wait for permission. It is the act of reclaiming authorship over your own damn story. And yes, you will fail. You will regress. You will stumble back into bad faith. That is the rhythm of human transformation. But the difference, once you've tasted responsibility, is that you know. You feel the falsehood like poison in your throat. You see the mask before it hardens. And you realize again and again that the path is still open. Because no one can walk it but you. You were never meant to be an echo. You were meant to be a voice. Not a replica. Not a puppet. A singular expression of being, carved in defiance of the absurd, glowing with the rough light of lived truth. So ask yourself, what are you still pretending not to know? What comfort are you choosing over becoming? What dream have you buried beneath practicality and fear? And then, even if your hands are shaking, choose again. Choose truth over convenience. Choose becoming over belonging. Choose meaning not as a thing to find, but as a thing to forge. This is the essence of Sartre's warning. It is not a condemnation, it is a call to stop escaping, a call to begin again and again, the most radical act a human can make, to live as if your life is your own, because it is.